Tonight we'll be talking about helping our kids navigate social situations, from conflict to relational aggression to bullying, and we have this great, wonderful, huge panel who's helped to plan a presentation for you this evening. So I will turn it over to them just to tell us their names and their roles within the district. I can start with Stephanie.
Good evening, I'm Stephanie Barg. I'm the coordinator for social and emotional learning in the Student Services Department.
Hello, I'm Melissa Julian, the principal of Pittsford Menon High School.
Mike Felslab, the assistant principal at Calkins Road. Welcome.
Amy Daniels, I'm a counselor here at Calkins Road.
Hi, I'm Lisa Weld. I'm a counselor at Barker Road.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Young. I'm the Executive Clinical Director of Pittsford Youth Services. We provide social work services in all the buildings except the high schools.
Hi, I'm Rich Albano. I'm the assistant principal at Menon Center Elementary.
Hi, I'm Robin Pato. I'm the counselor at Park Road Elementary School.
So as you can see, we have a wide breadth of people from elementary to high school, administrators, counselors, our community partners with Pittsford Youth Services. And tonight we are going to dig a little bit into some of the relational issues that we see our kids getting into, what our parents can do to help support, what you can expect from schools to help support, and then hopefully time for some questions around what other things do you need or questions do you have. So first, just an opportunity to connect at your tables. If you can just share your name if you don't already know each other, or turn around if you're by yourselves and include someone behind you, and just share one goal or one wish you have for your child as they are navigating social situations in or outside of school. Okay, as we get started tonight, hopefully we can keep these goals we have for our kids within our minds as we move forward. Obviously, we all want to work together to help our kids navigate social situations, and I know as a parent myself of two daughters, I use a lot of people up here on this panel to bounce ideas off of when they're struggling through things in school as well. So as educators, when it comes to our own kids, we're often grappling with all these things as well. So one other thing to have you just chat quickly with someone around you at your table is, when you're thinking of these terms, conflict, relational aggression, and bullying, what does that mean to you? And or what do you think sets those things apart, if anything? So just a chance to chat with someone around you. And then we'll come back together and share. Let's do this.
I hope that gave you a little bit of a chance to connect with people at your table. Does any table want to share anything that you've had, any interesting conversations? You can pass the mic if people want to volunteer, if not.
Yeah, I like that, thinking of it on a continuum, right? Kind of least to worst, hardest to handle, or maybe easiest to handle to harder to handle. Yeah, more intentional. Great. Anything else anybody shared? Yeah, so what Danielle said is relational aggression can be a form of bullying, and some of these things can meld into each other. That's a little bit what we'll talk about this evening. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm talking really loud. But yeah, I think when situations arise, we often find ourselves kind of trying to define the situation and understand it better. I think you did a really nice job of giving those definitions. So when you think of conflict, you do think of a disagreement, a fight, something like a serious argument, something like that. And, I guess we were brainstorming a little bit, but when you think about it between, students or children, it might be, disagreeing over, the latest, sneaker drop and what they like better, but maybe one person already purchased one, so then they get defensive, and it can escalate. But it starts really as a disagreement. So just that's kind of how we define conflict. When you shift into like relational aggression, as you pointed out as well, that does become a bit more serious. It's harm between relationships that's often with like manipulative behavior. So I would think of something like, people giving someone the silent treatment, saying they're not going to talk to one person, kind of. But some of this can, as you mentioned, really feed into being a bit of more of a bullying situation. And then when you think about bullying, it's unwanted aggressive behavior that involves real or perceived imbalance of power. So that's key, the imbalance of power, and then the behavior is repeated more than once. So that imbalance of power and repeated more than once is really key to kind of when it escalates to like that higher level of defining bullying.
Thank you, Lisa. Just a couple things to mention quickly. Tonight we're going to go through a few scenarios. So we're going to give a scenario of each of these different situations, and then what we would recommend be a parent response, and then what you can expect from the school and how we partner. But it's not up to parents to be able to say, gosh, maybe this is just a conflict situation, or it's just relational aggression, it's not that big of a deal. The most important thing is reach out to the school. If you're not sure, if you just want a sounding board, I can't tell you how many times a parent will call and say, I don't want you to do anything, I just want to tell you this is happening. And sometimes we say, okay, but we do have to do something, and let's talk about what that looks and sounds like. And sometimes it is just something we can tuck away and keep an extra eye on. But if you're thinking of, I don't know, should I contact that other parent? What should I be doing? How should I be guiding my child? Always err on the side of reaching out. It's actually our job to field those calls and to partner with you. So never feel like you're overstepping or bothering us at school. Reach out to the school counselor, the principal, someone that you have a trusted relationship with, and directly to your child's teacher if you feel like they can be of help in this situation as well. So don't feel like one of these is, it means that you shouldn't be doing anything or reaching out to the school. So if you take anything away from tonight, know that you can always call, and we're always here to help navigate those situations together, because it's not always black and white. So our first scenario here, we are going to have Robin and Rich walk us through a little bit. The scenario says 2 students have played together at recess every day since the start of the year. One day they have a disagreement. One student kicks sand at the other student's leg, who responds by ripping up the drawing the other student was working on. They begin calling each other names, and each is crying. And this is something we would put under the heading of conflict.
So this happens a lot at the elementary level. Recess keeps us very busy. There's 3 main things from the school and counselor perspective that we're going to tackle this with. First, we're going to make sure each kid is safe and listened to and work to de-escalate them. If they're both clearly visibly upset, that's going to be our first priority, to calm them down, get them to their base level so that we can help them through and figure out what happened. Then we're going to try to repair this relationship that obviously had an event happen that's going to impact their friendship. So that can look a few different ways, but as the adult, we're going to walk them through that. We're going to let each child tell their side of what happened, and we're going to try to repair that and make sure that each person feels comfortable in that situation. Sometimes that can't occur that day, but if it can, we're going to try to do our best to repair that relationship so they both feel comfortable being in class together, playing together, moving forward. And then a really important part that we always include is a learning component. So to try to give them the skills moving forward that they know how to prevent this from happening again, what they can do before it turns into anything physical or harmful. We're really going to try to build up those skills, which we will talk about in a little bit. There's a few ways we do this, but that's really the main takeaway, is making sure we can prevent it from happening.
So a couple of things to add to what Robin mentioned. I think, so this is she mentioned it's a pretty common example. And every situation is a little bit unique. At the elementary level, we're K through 5, of course, and we have in September, we have kids as young as 4 years old coming to us. our fifth graders are leaving at 11 or 12 years old. So there is a pretty big range. That range, in some cases, but pretty rare, can be situations that are more similar to what we'll see the middle school and high school talk about. The one important piece that we think a lot about is relationships with adults. And we're lucky to have tiers of relationships. So this example, if you played it out, potentially it could start at recess and end in the classroom after recess. It talks about ripping up a piece of work. Oftentimes, our teachers are in the best spot to help do those things that Robin mentioned. And they are masters at it. They're the best that we have to get to that point, and they start that process off. Where typically a counselor or an administrator would get involved is if those kids were so upset that they needed support on site, and sometimes that happens. And that's where we would do some of the de-escalation and have some time to talk through with kids. Another really critical component is parent communication. So if it's a case where it's more than just maybe a quiet hallway conversation or some de-escalation and calming by the teacher and problem solving and guidance from the teacher, if Robin got involved or I got involved and we needed to do a little bit more in-depth support, we would likely be reaching out to parents in almost every case, because we want, number one, you to know that your child was upset above and beyond what normally would happen in school, and also potentially they were out of instruction for a period of time while we were talking through the problem. We also want you to know what options and actions we would be thinking about moving forward. Robin mentioned after the fact, again, we're really lucky because counselors in counseling programs, there's times where there may be some situations in a class where the teacher can work with the school counselor, one of the school counselors, and say, I know you have a friendship lesson, would you mind coming into the class and spend some time doing a friendship lesson? And that we find is really helpful. The other parallel part that's really great for us is on a daily routine level, we're doing things like morning meetings where kids meet with each other, build a community, and are working through problem-solving strategies every day. Another piece that we try to work through when it's appropriate is restorative practices. So especially if kids have a prior relationship and we're really concerned about them moving forward through the rest of the year in their community, we'll facilitate with an adult and the kids to talk through how they felt in that stressful situation. That way, each side has a chance to deal with it and talk through it. Some things that you can do at home to help are really just try to never hold back your concerns. We always would like to hear from parents if you're hearing things from your kids before it gets too far, right? The worst thing for us is to talk to you in February and hear, this has been happening to our kid all year long, and we're kind of in shock. So we would advise, always reach out to your teacher, and then if you need additional support, counselor or an administrator.
Thank you both. Yeah, so great examples for us to go through, and these are things that could maybe be more of an elementary level scenario, but certainly could happen at middle school where they're outside and they're getting upset, someone hit someone with the ball too hard, and so those are things we can talk through with our kids at home and just practice that perspective taking of, you know, sometimes we have a lot of things going on, some people aren't managing their stress very well, but also understanding what was the impact on your child and what else might they need at school. They might just need you to sit there and listen to them. They might need you to advocate for them and say, okay, we'll talk to someone safe at school so that you're feeling comfortable going back and playing outside or going to recess or whatever the case may be. So our next scenario is one that is more around relational aggression. It says there's a lunch table of 6 students who have all been friends for quite some time. 2 of the students have a conflict. The conflict is resolved and the 2 decide to take a break from the friendship. Following this conflict, every day at lunch, one of the 2 involved in the conflict is isolated by the other 5 students. This includes whispering, giggling, and a lack of engagement in any conversation. The isolated student feels left out and very alone. They are no longer included in their outside activities.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, as a parent, how you might want to respond to this situation. If you have middle schoolers, this is unfortunately very common. And I guess I want to say first, if your child comes home and shares this with you, first thing, pat yourself on the back and be proud of yourself for good parenting, that your child felt comfortable sharing this. The other thing I think it's important to acknowledge as a parent, and I'm like crossing the line between school counselor and the fact that I have 3 kids of my own who have been through middle school, I think it's okay to acknowledge that like this makes your heart hurt, right? We all, we hate to see our kids in these types of situations. So I would say as a parent, you kind of need to take a deep breath and devote some time to this, and I think really let your child first drain off a lot of emotion and just kind of, if you can, listen without interrupting, without giving advice right away. I think a lot of kids in the middle school age range really appreciate sometimes if you kind of check in with them and say, are you just venting to me because you need to get this out? Or do you want to talk and try to problem solve? And, and to kind of take them where they're at and what they're ready to talk about. I think it's really, really important and so hard to do to try to remain objective and remember that you're hearing one piece of a much bigger story, and all the students involved probably have their own perspective and their own hurt feelings. And I think it's really important to try to just keep that in mind before you start just kind of randomly just supporting them and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Just say you want to get the full story. And then I really think brainstorming options, and I hope that one of those options is to contact a trusted adult at the school, hopefully the school counselor. I mean, I can tell you, speaking for the middle school counselors, we appreciate this information more than you can ever know. It so helps us. And then I think we like to partner with parents. Sometimes kids will say, they might say to you, don't call the school because I don't want them to call these kids down and yell at them. What we would do as counselors with relational aggression is we would start by talking to the students individually to kind of see where they're both at and then offer some suggestions. A lot of times that is, I think we think it's best if we kind of do a circle and talk about this and try to come to some understanding. We also will partner with our assistant principal to make sure that they're in the loop. A lot of times in our building, Mike's involved in a lot of restorative conversations and circles. And we really do investigate to see what the true story is. And you're right, I think we talked about this in the beginning. Sometimes it really does elevate to the point where an administrator needs to be involved. But we welcome the communication. I know it's heartbreaking. We've all been there. We hate to see our kids struggle with that. And the more we can work together and communicate, I think the better we can help your kids.
And I'll piggyback on and just kind of talk from my role and follow up a little bit on what the school's going to do in these cases. Specifically in this scenario, I'm going to be listening for, am I detecting relational aggression? In other words, is there some kind of evidence to me that one student has told the other students, hey, in a coordinated effort, this is what we're going to do. We're all going to just not talk to student A at the lunch table today. Okay, this is now classic relational aggression. Another example that I've seen is we're gonna all go to a party, right? And one kid who's on the outs right now, we'll all take pictures, we'll all post about it, and in other words, there's some level of coordination and intent behind it. And that's the key. And I want to talk a little bit about a lot of what I'm doing when I look at these things and try to figure out what's the best way to help the students and what's the best way to make it stop. It has to be what's the intention behind the action. So we get into looking at things like, well, did what happened, is it because there was some sort of conflict between friend groups and somebody did something mean, something rude? Was it intentional? Often something that's done that's rude is unintentional. There's a lack of awareness that what they did was offensive. Then there's times where kids are, I'm mad at this kid and I'm going to do something mean. I'm going to call him a name. I'm going to shove him, whatever that form takes. The intention is very important. So I'm going to be listening for what was the intention behind the action. If there is intentionality there, we're going to label it what it is. It's a form of bullying. One of the things I do is maintain the dignity for all students records for our school. I'm going to log it as a violation that's taken place and keep a record on that so that if there's future altercations between the kids, people are in the know about that. We know there's a history and we need to react very seriously. It's not just a one-off thing. when it says support individually, the other thing we're going to be doing any time there's a case of whether it's bullying, conflict, these sorts of things, I like to tell the parents, and I'm glad you're here to say this, look, the ball, we're going to work with you on this. If you're telling me, look, I just want you to know about this, and I want your advice, you're somebody that works with kids, you see teenagers, you see preteens, what are your thoughts on this? But I don't want you to do anything right away. I'm going to respect that. I'm going to work with you on that, okay? Because sometimes I might know more and I can help. Hey, let me tell you what's going on here. You just gave me a big piece of the puzzle. So it never hurts to reach out and talk. I'm not going to now take the ball and run with it, and suddenly your kid's mad at you for betraying their trust, okay? So that's important, and that's what I think, when we talk about support individually, it's working together with you. You're the parent. What's going to work? What are you comfortable with? What's your kid comfortable with? Amy did a good job of discussing, how they're going to help, how the counselors are going to help, the psychologist is going to help. They're going to come at it and look at it. What background do they have and what's going on in the situation? Communication with staff and parents, this is also key. If we know there's something going on between some kids, whether it's bullying, conflict, you let the people know, hey, be on the lookout for this. This happened today. Something that would normally seem quite innocuous. What might have sounded like just some playful words had significant meaning to the one kid. And when the kid heard this uttered in the hall, immediately started crying. Because we informed the teachers as to what to look for, what to listen for, they're able to get that information to me, and I'm able to quickly intervene. And if nothing else, tell the kid who made this comment, hey, we know what you're up to, we're calling you out on it, and we're letting your parents know. And most of the time, these kids, they're great kids, and they have a conscience, and when they know they're getting called out on something, it really, most times, puts an end to it. So I think that's important. The other thing to talk about here is the restorative conversations, that it's a weird crossover between our worlds that tends to happen. But if kids are in conflict, and let's face it, conflict is very normal. It's normal in our lives. It's how we handle conflict that looks significantly different between a middle school cafeteria and the lunchroom at work. So a lot of what we're trying to do is teach skills, teach kids, look, what was the conflict? What was really the root cause? What was the assumption or the mistake that was made? And the only way you can do that is digging down into the story that the kid has, their perspective, and this is time consuming. So there may be times where kids miss some classes. But like I try to tell people, the learning that takes place there in the moment is absolutely critical. It's like the coach being on the field at the time and being able to say, do it this way, not this way. Why? It's fresh in their mind and it's in the moment. And we can't replicate that at home. It has to happen at the school, and it's something we're really glad and able to do.
Thank you both so much. That was a great description, and getting into the restorative practices, if you look into some of our past power hours, we've had some evenings just on restorative practices, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next scenario and then afterward as well. But there is really a process that we follow to be able to hear from all the students involved and really not make assumptions as far as what kids need to be able to move forward and what each individual child needs to feel safe and heard and valued to move on in a situation. So our last scenario is a bullying scenario. A student posts a video on Snapchat of another student in a very embarrassing situation. The next day at school, students begin calling the student in the video a nickname with a negative connotation. In PE class, several other students begin using the nickname and commenting on the embarrassing video.
Is it me first?
It's you first,
Yes. All right, so I'm going to comment a little bit more on the parent piece when it's a situation like this. Not to review what I already have said, but I think in a situation like this, it's really vital that you do contact the school. This is a really significant situation that needs to be dealt with. I also think, again, listen to your child, let them drain off some emotion. for this situation, I think, if they don't want to do anything, this is the time where you really kind of got to push them, that we need to try to resolve this, not just for their sake, but for the student who's done this. They need to learn a lesson and hopefully not repeat the same mistake again in the future. I do think another really important piece as a parent to connect with this scenario is to brainstorm with your child who are the people that support them in school, not just the adults, but other students. We deal, unfortunately, a ton with social media stuff similar to this, and I would say almost the vast majority of the time, it comes to our knowledge from another student. It's not the victim. So I think happily in a lot of these situations, kids do have other kids who realize this is wrong and want to help and support. So I think, lean into those relationships, let those friendships grow, and really work with the school to resolve this situation. And if it's someone that you know and know the parent, I think you could reach out to the parent directly and have a conversation with them about it.
From the school perspective, one other thing that I would suggest as a parent is if you catch wind of this, or if your child comes down to you, it's an evening and they say this just happened, again, we commend you for having that relationship with your student, but be sure to capture the evidence. This is a Snapchat example. Snapchat, as we know, goes away, so if there's a way for you to capture that evidence and then provide it to the school, that's really, really helpful in a lot of these situations. As we know, social media is fleeting. It tends to disappear, and that's part of the reason why the students like it so much. And you don't have to be in the app to capture it. What we do at school personally is we take our phones, we have the student open the phone, and then we just take a picture from our phone so we have the evidence. So anytime you can capture that, that's really helpful. And then as soon as you can, contact the school, whether that's putting in a DASA report, which is on every school's website, or contacting the counselor, the administrator, or even if your child does have a teacher. Most of the time, as Amy said, this comes to us through our back channels, which are other students reporting it. We are trying to create a culture where students will report for themselves. What we do on our side is we start the investigation. That means we talk to students that are impacted, we talk to witnesses, and then if we can find out the student who did what is being said, we bring them in as well. We try to minimize the impact on the students, and we don't let it spread as far as we can. So we'll bring students in, we'll ask them to delete the content off their phone after we capture that evidence. We do work with social media sources when we can to take the content down. I'll be perfectly honest with you, Instagram, Facebook, etc. are not good partners when it comes to that. And as much as you can report and report and report, and that's what we'll do. We just had a situation where for 20 minutes in my office, all we did was report. So as much as we can, we would ask parents to do that as well. We then communicate with parents or guardians and families around who the victims are, but also potentially the student involvement, and ask for your support and help. We make sure the victim does have a connected and trusted person to talk to. Oftentimes it is a counselor, sometimes it's a teacher, and sometimes honestly it's an assistant principal who they feel very connected to and want to share the information. And our goal with that is to make sure that they, throughout the day and throughout the cycle, have someone who can check in with them and dipstick with them. Sometimes it doesn't hit them right away that this happened to them, and therefore they're like, I'm fine. But 24 hours later, they come back and they're like, I'm not fine. And so what are the supports we put in place for that? We make sure our counselors have them on the radar, and we communicate with our staff to say things like, please be aware this happened. This is what's happening right now. We're dealing with it, but we want you to be aware in case you notice anything. The student becomes more withdrawn. The student's not as vocal as they were. You're finding that they're a little bit more grumpy than just the typical first period that you see. We want to make sure we are watching those pieces. From there, we look at the code of conduct. We determine what the next best cause would, or the next steps would be. We will apply restorative practices when it's appropriate. In a true bullying situation, you don't always put students together. So there is sometimes a consequence that also comes with it. And then we look to, as Mike said earlier, the DASA components. And what are the DASA components there? Is it tied to one of those protected categories? And if so, it becomes part of the DASA file versus just a consequence through Infinite Campus around a behavior referral. Our goal is to try to minimize the impact on the student victims as much as possible. And we work with parents on what does that look like. For restorative practices, which is something we're really trying to embed regularly, the whole point of discipline is to learn. So we want students to learn from their behaviors. And so we will have students write letters to each other. One of the things we're really talking about at the high school level, and it started as early as September, is intent versus impact. A lot of the time at the high school level we hear, we're just joking. We're just kidding. It was a joke. We're just being funny. Well, that might have been what you thought this was in that moment, but now you have to look at the ripples around you and what's the impact on the world around you and the other students. And once we start to talk through those ripples and that impact, then we start to talk about what is the restorative piece and how do we get there. And it can be sometimes when kids are ready, and this can take days and this can take weeks, it can be a circle where kids in the phys ed class come together and say, this is how this worked, this is what happened to me, and this is how it impacted me. But it's a long process. So we ask for patience as we work through some of these pieces with all of you as partners and try to really help support the children in the moment. Again, these are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who make mistakes. And we're trying to teach them before there's bigger ramifications.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. One of the other things I would just mention, and we'll talk a little bit more about DASA and the DASA process in a moment. These situations are so hard because we're looking at our children when they're really hurting and vulnerable, and they're potentially worried about going back to school, and we may be worried about them going back to school. The best thing for kids in those situations where that anxiety is building is to get through that threshold and come back to school. And that can be really, really challenging, but we work through these situations all the time with our mental health staff, our administrators. So what can we do to support your child so that they feel safe to get back through that door? Because the longer that they're not in school, the more that anxiety is going to build. And we can come up with a plan that is a safe plan for your child to be there. And as Ms. Julian was saying, we do use, just because we have a restorative mindset and we use restorative practices, we do still have traditional consequences that we use sometimes to remove children from a situation to make it safe for someone else to be able to come back into school. So if someone's really harmed me in a way that I'm unsafe being back at school, then I may need some separation from that person while we're working through a restorative process and taking accountability and developing a plan to move forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk about some of the preventative things that we do in our schools.
Thank you, Shana. So a lot of what we just talked about were responses to situations, and those frequently will build on skills that have been taught and discussed at sort of that whole school level. So by level, it looks a little bit different, elementary, middle to high school. K-8, we have a lot of direct lesson instruction that meet a lot of these skill areas to develop when you need to solve problems and you need to come together when harm happens. For elementary, our counselors and our school librarians have some pretty direct curriculum that I thought was notable for tonight's audience. Starting in first grade, talking about size of the problem, to second grade, conflict resolution, and third grade, having that growth mindset to be able to accept and receive feedback in those hard conversations as kids. Fourth grade, looking at tools to calm and understand and respond to peer pressure, talking about kindness and empathy and rumors in that same fourth grade range. And then in fifth grade, really getting into digital drama, media balance, and cyberbullying. Similarly with our school librarian lessons, which has been recently updated, some direct instruction happens for all our kids around digital citizenship. That can be anything from media balance to privacy to sources to also etiquette digitally and cyberbullying. So we are starting young with our students to talk about the world that they live in and the impact that they'll have amongst peers and for their own self. Middle school, that looks a little bit more grade level based. Within the grade 6 series of lessons and circles, like Amy mentioned, there's a lot of topics and conversations around being an upstander and where that fits and when it needs to fit and when it might not, is directly rumors. Certainly more directly in 6th grade, and I have a 6th grader myself, lots of conversations and learning specifically about bullying and the DASA process and that relational aggression. As they're moving up in the grades, more and more direct instruction around popularity and friendships, communication, and using their voice. And then in 8th grade, we have that peer component through our web leaders and starting to foster those peer connections even more directly. Similarly, in the high school, really drawing on student voice and connections amongst each other and lifting student voice, like we spoke on, so that people feel safe to report, students have trusted adults to go to. Our link crew is similar to the web crew model where there's peer mentoring in place. Circles are building in frequency in those spaces to have kids drive the topic of the circle, so that continues to grow. In both high schools, we have a Sources of Strength program, which at the heart of it is an upstream suicide prevention program that really elevates and teaches explicitly what we can draw on when things are hard and who we can turn to, which does have a direct impact when you talk about things that are serious like relational aggression and bullying. So there's a lot of skills across our curriculum that support some of these conversations and responses that when the hard conversations are happening, we can touch back on and draw back to for students. Some other common practices certainly are around student voice, co-developing norms in class compacts, which are those agreements that the kids in the classroom are helping to set at the beginning of the year and then periodically revisit. I know as a classroom teacher myself, I was able to pull in some of the things that I saw as a teacher and build in that teaching through some of those conversations around norms and lift up the student voice. Classroom meetings are problem-solving times to be able to come together and model what it looks like when we work through those scenarios. Certainly we've heard a lot about community circles and the space and place for those. Our morning meetings in the K-5 have been mentioned, where each day we're working on different skills and connection. And then K-12, again, and we've shared this in previous power hours, really working with students to be able to identify at least one trusted or connected adult that they can turn to in the school. So similar to Melissa's comment about discipline being, the intent is to teach, so is a lot of the conversation in these lessons to be able to then draw from when you have that conflict. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to turn it over to Lorraine to just talk a little bit more deeply. She works with a lot of our families in the community about what are things specifically that parents can do. What language can you use? How can you respond when your child comes to you, regardless of what type of situation it is?
Hi, all. I'm going to be mindful of the time, and this panel did a really great job in talking about what parents can do and be supportive. But one of the things that I think is so important is when a child comes home, whatever age they are, elementary, middle, high school, usually what you folks get is the emotion, the being angry or upset, whatever that is, and you're not even prepared and you're just getting it thrown at us. And again, as a parent, the first thing I know I want to do is fix it. I want to, of course it's the other person's problem, it's not my child, and I'm just going to fix it, right? That's probably the worst thing that we can do, even though it's what we want to do. So the first thing is really just, like as Amy said, let them vent. They got to get to a place where they can be calm, because none of us are rational when we're upset. And we think we are, but we're not. So the first thing is really just really listening to them. Saying less is more. We need to try not to help them at that moment. We just need to be there as a support for them and let them know that we're there. Once they calm down, then we can help them with the problem solving piece of it. How can we brainstorm? What can we do? And the child should be the person that really takes that lead. What we may want to do is, okay, I'm going to call the parent, and I'm going to call school, and they're like, whoa, I don't want to do that. And one of the wonderful things I keep hearing is that when kids come and they talk to their parents, that's a gift they're giving to you, especially the older they get. They want to go in their bedroom, shut the door, or be on their phone. So listen to them and ask them what they want, and take their lead so that you can promote them to continue to come and talk to you as much as they possibly can. I know when you're an elementary parent, you think those problems are really big, and they are for the children at that moment. The problems get bigger as they move on. So we want the child, say if your teenager is out and drank and they shouldn't have, that they know they can call you to say, pick me up, right? So keeping the the door open for that type of communication. So that's really the biggest thing. The other thing that a lot of parents will ask me about is, how do you teach, and I know this isn't what I'm supposed to say, but I'm going to, empathy, right? Empathy is probably the hardest skill to teach. And obviously being a role model is awesome, but having your child do a role play with you where they're the person that maybe they said something unkind to, or they did something that was mean. If you do that role play and they have to be the other person, it's so powerful. And it's really simple that everybody can do. So I would highly recommend trying to do that. Now, after you partner with the school and everyone's working together and things are getting resolved, that's the best case scenario, right? Partnering with each other. Sometimes that's not enough, and the child or the family feels that they need more support. So that's when Pittsford Youth Services comes to play. We are in the 5 elementary buildings, also at Calkins and Barker Road. And the staff, the mental health team will say, listen, we have a kiddo here that really could use some extra support, and we will be a part of that. And we will see the kiddos in the school building. And if they need even maybe more than that, or the issues are a little bit more complex, we can also see them in a community-based social work program, which is right on Main Street. And we can make a referral for that. Or if your student needs maybe some support in the summer, because the school department is not available in the summer, everybody needs a little break, we are open. And so we can provide support not just for your children, but also for yourself. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. The other piece there we would just add is it's okay if you're seeing things happening on social media. Just take it right. Just get that phone right out of there, or have your child block others on social media. Really, just ending that can really be helpful in those situations too. And that can be hard when your child's already upset. But as parents, sometimes we need to just block it to help our kids' minds really heal as they're starting to worry constantly about things that are posted online. And I'm going to talk a little bit about DASA, the Dignity for All Students Act. And one of the things when it comes to bullying, one of the things that sets bullying apart, as we discussed, is that it's repeated. And the interesting and potentially awful thing about social media is I could post one thing about Stephanie, one nasty comment, but she can go back to that comment and she can read it hundreds of times. So now my one maybe unintentional, maybe mean-spirited thing could become bullying because she's continuing to be confronted with that. So it's something to really think about, that something that may not seem like it's that big of a deal. Kids really do go back to how many likes did I get or not get, how many times was I left out of something, and they will go back and read those mean-spirited things. As adults, we do as well, right? We always go to the most negative thing that someone says, and we could miss 100 other things. So one of the things that we talked about a bit, especially with the relational aggression and the bullying, is the Dignity for All Students Act. Each of our schools has a Dignity Act coordinator. So that's a New York state law that helps us to be consistent in how we're handling situations where bullying is happening, especially when it is involved in a protected class. So if we're talking about students that are being bullied based on their race, their real or perceived gender identity, sexual orientation, could be their weight, their height, their all sorts of different protected categories, their ability, their disability. It could be a lot of different things. But any of those protected categories would fall under the Dignity for All Students Act. And we have responsibilities as a school and as reporters. All teachers and school staff are trained on DASA before they're hired, but then they're also retrained every year, and our students are trained every year. And so all of the Dignity Act coordinators for each building work with me. I'm the coordinator for the district, and we meet regularly Last year, we really consolidated all of the training materials we use for our students and staff, so everybody's getting a consistent message. So all of the elementary students get the same message that corresponds to the language that's being used in the classrooms, in the hallways, and on the announcements, and the same thing at middle school and high school. All school staff are getting the same message around what their responsibilities are. And really, our responsibilities come down to when we hear something, see something, we have to report that. So we have to report it within 24 hours to an administrator, and we have to follow up in writing with that. And that's when the administrators start their process, which they spoke through, of investigating, finding out what happened, and then we have a process for documenting not only the investigation, but the outcome, and we actually report all of those pieces at the end of the year to the state of New York. Really, it's important, what Mr. Falzoy was saying, is it helps us develop, is there patterns that are happening, even if it's happening for one child? Is it happening in one area of the school? Are there things that are happening maybe in a lunchroom or at a certain grade level that we need to address? It helps us each year to be able to look through some of that data together and find out what better things can we do to be more preventative in some of those different situations the kids are dealing with. In terms of reporting, the school piece is important, letting kids know that they have the ability and the responsibility to report things as well. Really talking a lot about see something, say something, or just empowering the kids to have voice and have those opportunities, and really having some of those community circles is a great way to be able to let kids know that we care about what they're thinking and feeling at school, so that they do feel more comfortable sharing. And the more we talk about DASA at school, the more kids understand that it's our obligation, and we will be following up on all of those. Any time that you speak to an administrator or a school staff member about a potential bullying situation, we follow this process. We'll investigate, we'll do our due diligence on our end, but those can happen in a number of different ways. So you can make a DASA report by calling a school administrator. You can use an online form, which you could choose to be anonymous, although it's really helpful if you let us know who you are so we can follow up and get more details. But as I think Ms. Julian said, every school website has access to that, and really just the front page of the Pittsford Schools website, right down the left-hand bar, you'll see DASA. You can click on that and go to the school's the school form that's listed there, and you can go ahead and input that information, and we'll follow up. That immediately generates a report to the Dignity Act coordinator in each building. That's an administrator in the building who is trained, and I get a copy of that as well, so we can support. And anything, even if you're sending an email, all of those are reports. So you don't have to fill out the form online. That is a way that people like to report things, because then you have it documented in writing as well. But know that if you want to talk something through, you're also making a report in that way as well, and it will be documented in the same way on our end. One of the things that can be a frustrating piece for many of us is when your child's involved in one of these situations, there are some protections that all children have. So we wouldn't be able to say, well, this other child did this to your child, so they'll be suspended for 3 days and they'll be back on this day. And so you won't always know what the specific consequence is that's associated with it. And most of the time what the conversation will be around is, yes, we're following up, yes, there will be consequences. However, let's focus on how can we support your child? What do you think your child needs to feel safe coming back to school? And we'll have that conversation with your child as well, and partner together to see what do we need to be able to move forward in a way that helps them to kind of work through the hurdle that's been placed before them. And just the other thing to mention, I want to save a few minutes here for questions, is we do work really closely together to calibrate. So because we've been working closely together across the district, we'll do tabletop exercises, and we'll just call each other and say, have you seen this before? I get calls every single day from administrators working on situations of conflict or aggression or bullying or a whole host of other things, and we just talk through what are the best ways we might be able to handle that, what are good ways to get additional information, so that we're being consistent at each level and just kind of thinking through things in the best ways that we can. And so with that, I just want to turn it over and see if there's any questions that anybody has. That was an awful lot of information. Yes.
Talk about a little bit about some ancillary symptoms you're finding this out 2 months after the fact because you've got students who are, they're getting 4 grades since last week. So what does that look like for you and, as parents, what do you see?
That is a great question. I think we see that, we see both, right? We see where there's direct evidence and we can name something. We see when someone says something's happening and we can't find direct evidence of it. And then we do see situations where we're seeing, as you said, symptoms of something, but we're not sure exactly what it is. So I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to speak a little bit about that.
I would just add, I think we're always kind of, trying to establish strong relationships with our students. I mean, I can think of a situation like in the middle school, we do teaming. So I had a teacher reach out to me recently and say, so-and-so just feels a bit disconnected. Like, I feel like something is going on. So that teacher reached out to me. I reached out to home, just to check in, to say. So I do feel like people are kind of we do our best to really keep a close watch on students. We don't always know what is happening. There is, to your point, a lot of things that happen in the hallways that go, that we don't know about unless somebody tells us. But from a perspective of like when we notice a change in something, I feel like we definitely take action. We want to pursue. So if you're noticing something at home, again, I would encourage a phone call to school so that we become more aware, or it might be, affirm what we're starting to see, and then we can have some conversations. Has there been any changes at home? Have we noticed any changes at school? And then what can we do to kind of really support that student?
Yeah, that's a huge piece if you let us know, because sometimes a parent will call and we'll say, no, we don't see that at all. And then the next day you say, I did notice that now that you said that. So anything you can do to help us just put extra eyes on things will be really helpful.
Shayna,
Yeah.
I think the other thing to note is at the high school level, they're working with 8 or 9 different adults every day. So one thing that we really try to maximize is that trusted adult, because they may not be forthcoming with a counselor. It may be a teacher who's noticed something or seen something that they're more open with, and then we loop back to the counselor or the administrator to then start looking at, okay, something is happening in the hallway between this period and this period. Let's put someone out there. Let's make sure we're watching this. Let's make sure that we're following up on that to try to get to some of those pieces. We know as they become older, they tend to try to either handle things themselves or become a little bit more closed off, and that's why we focus so much on the social emotional side of things and trying to connect kids with who do they trust, whether it's our cafeteria manager, Jess, who they trust a lot, or one of our teachers or a counselor or administrator. But having those relationships, like Lisa was saying, is so crucial to what we do every day.
And our kids are going through a lot, so sometimes kids will withdraw or will all of a sudden be more distracted or irritable, and it's something totally unrelated to a relational piece, but it's stress that could be very normal. They have some exams coming up. They're still processing something that happened, a year ago with something. So there's things that could be going on that we're not sure exactly what it is. So anything you're seeing will help us, and then we can connect them to find out what's going on and how can we help them to work through it. Yeah, so the question was, are there ever situations where either a family or a student does not feel safe to engage in a restorative conversation? Yes. And so we like to say what you said, they're not ready yet. And as we mentioned, sometimes it's not right to do that. Sometimes something is so broken or there's not a relationship to restore back to. And so you could actually be re-traumatizing, re-harming someone by saying, let's just get together. And it's that, go hug your sister and tell her that you're sorry kind of thing, right? Like just get together so we can check it off. And that's really not the process. And it can be hard because sometimes we think, oh gosh, this really would be great. It would be really helpful in this situation. But if a student's not ready, or if a student's not ready to take accountability truly for what their impact was, then it's really not a helpful situation. It's not going to move us forward. So we would rather wait and work individually with those students and connect them to really someone in our mental health team to help process through, either until they are ready or until they're ready to move on, and be able to just connect them with other more positive things and connections they have.
That's a really good answer.
I was just going to say, too, depending on the interactions those students have, a lot of times we'll just focus on how they can be in the same space together, and then we can do that separately. We don't need to have them be friends. They don't need to force apologies that aren't genuine, but we're going to have to learn how to engage and be around people that we don't necessarily like, and so what that looks like, and really giving them skills that they're comfortable without having to force any connection or friendship.
Yeah, good question. So that was, there could be either lots of things that happen leading up that maybe the school doesn't know about or you might not know about. And do we have to see that repeated behavior in order to call something bullying? No. So we've definitely had situations where we've seen one event and that's a DASA violation, even if it's happened one time, because it's based on a protected category, it's caused harm, and it needs to be addressed in that way. So we would investigate and follow that. The New York State definition of bullying would be that it's repeated and there's that power differential there. But we definitely see things in school, and even in that situation, it might not even be bullying, but it's harassment, right? And it falls under the Dignity for All Students Act. And so in either of those situations, we want to focus on what do we need to do for those students to support them to learn from what they've done and why it caused harm, and to help that other student be able to re-enter that space and feel safe. So no, something doesn't have to happen over and over again before it either kind of qualifies as being DASA or rises to the level of bullying. We really look at that impact. And I'll just circle back to something, I know we're out of time, but that I think it was, I can't remember if it was Lisa or Amy that mentioned in the beginning, is first pat yourself on the back that your child's telling you something, because you may have information and other children may be just not sharing that. And so sometimes we think, well, someone else's parent's going to share. But it's really important that we continue to partner together and raise things up to the top of that inbox or to the top of that voicemail, or just making sure that we're keeping those lines of communication open. Go ahead. One last, yes. Yeah, so the question was if a student has an IEP. So if a student has, we would take all of everything into consideration. So a student may not have a documented disability, but may be, working through anxiety, all sorts of other things. But depending on, I guess, what the classification is for the student and the supports that they need, we would work with their case manager, with the person who connects with them at school, to make sure that, sometimes there's social stories involved. It depends on the age of the student to make sure that they're understanding what's happening, that their voice is heard in a way that values what their experience is. And a lot of our students, our students are very much able to express themselves and have some of those really deep conversations, but it's all in the prep. So that those restorative conversations involve individual meetings with both students, with staff that support them, and it involves bringing them together in a way that the kids are really well prepared for what's going to happen, and how they're going to share how they're feeling. So kids just may need different things, different tools to help them prepare, just as they would for any other way that they're going to be expressing themselves in school, depending on their needs. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. There are index cards here, just because if there's anything else that you feel like you weren't comfortable sharing, additional information you want us to have, or other things that maybe you were wishing that we had covered tonight, please feel free to take those, write anything you'd like on them, choose to put your name on them or not, and you can leave them up here on the table. And if you put your name and email address on the sign-in, we'll be following up with some feedback, asking you for brief feedback, and also for just your ideas for additional topics that you might want some more information on. So thank you so much for being here. So good to see everybody, and hope you have a great evening. Thank you.